Okay, welcome back. We're 6 recommendations away from celebrating. I'm going to go start in the same way. I'll do a quick overview of the recommendations, and then we'll plunge in. The first is a federal agency should safeguard the availability of blood, not just its safety. The second is that companies that provide critical materials for the manufacture of blood should work with HHS to develop and enact contingency plans to stabilize the blood supply. This, of course, goes to supply chain, to the shrinking number of industry partners the blood industry has, and how that leaves us vulnerable. Funding should be available for projects that will stabilize the blood supply. 4, funding should be available to develop novel means for extending the outdate of perishable materials maintained in stockpiles for blood component manufacture. 5, a working group should be convened to identify potential short-term regulatory changes that would allow for greater flexibility to meet short or long-term surge capacity needs. And 6, the negotiation of a bidirectional memorandum of understanding between the United States and Canada should be recommended. Okay, let's wade in. Recommendation number 1 of the second set. The committee recommends that an agency within HHS be charged with safeguarding the availability of blood. This agency should work closely with FDA so that regulatory measures developed for blood safety are balanced by the need to maintain blood availability. The committee also recommends that companies providing critical supplies for blood manufacturing and storage shall work with HHS funding agencies to develop and enact contingency plans to stabilize the blood supply chain. So initially, this was the language of the first recommendation. After we received joint comments back from ABB, ABC, and ARC, this was split. So the joint comments were: our organizations request ACBTSA revise this recommendation to read, the committee recommends that the HHS Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy, OIDP, create a publicly available action plan that 1, includes specific activities to safeguard the availability of blood, and 2, indicates how the agency intends to implement coordination and collaboration with other federal entities, including the FDA. So I liked this this comment. I thought that it brought together this recommendation in an actionable way. So the final revised recommendation is what reads below. Okay, as before, I'm going to go through all 6 recommendations and then we will whiteboard it. Recommendation 2. Committee recommends that companies providing critical supplies for blood manufacturing and storage shall work with HHS funding agencies to develop and enact contingency plans to stabilize the blood supply chain. The comments from ABB, ABC, and ARC, we recommend that ACBTSA revise the language to explicitly identify the HHS funding agencies with which the companies should collaborate. This adjustment will provide a more precise and actionable directive for the entities involved, and that led to the revised recommendation below with the revised language in red. The committee recommends that HHS should provide companies that produce critical supplies for blood manufacturing and storage with specific pathways to speak with funding agencies to develop and enact contingency plans to stabilize the blood supply chain. Again, I really appreciated the comments, the joint comments, because they made this something that could be implemented. They made these recommendations practicable. Recommendation 3. The committee recommends that OASH or HHS, some other HHS funding organization, receive an enabling budget to be used for projects that stabilize the blood supply such as stockpile of key supplies and components. Joint comments read, we request that the ACBTSA also recommend that the Assistant Secretary of Health recommend that ASPR, 1, elucidate its role in stabilizing the blood supply chain, and 2, revise its policies pertaining to medical countermeasures, or MCMs, to ensure the availability of essential items, including but not limited to blood bags, saline, reagents, pipettes, and other critical components necessary for maintaining a secure and adequate blood supply. So the revised recommendation was put into language as shown below. Again, in red, the committee also recommends that the Assistant Secretary of Health recommend that ASPR elucidate its role in stabilizing the blood supply chain. And 2, the Assistant Secretary of Health revise its policies pertaining to medical countermeasures to ensure the availability of essential items, including but not limited to blood bags, saline, etc., and other critical components necessary for maintaining a secure and adequate blood supply. Recommendation 4. Committee recommends that an HHS funding organization offer grant or contract funding that enables the development of novel means for extending the outdate of perishable materials in the stockpile. And the joint comments noted that ACBTSA revised the recommendation to request that HHS 1 identify the specific HHS funding organization entrusted with overseeing and implementing this endeavor, and 2, specify which agencies within HHS are responsible for advancing strategies to extend the shelf life of perishable materials. So the revised recommendation does exactly that. Okay, moving on to 5. This, I anticipate considerable discussion. Normally, I've just been including the recommendation itself, but the preamble or the whereas statements that preceded the recommendation have come under fire, so I've included them here. Whereas an emergency may place a short-term strain upon the blood supply that affects patient care, and B, regulatory changes for blood component manufacturing could alleviate the short-term strain by temporary measures such as, and then, oh, the numbering got messed up, I apologize. That should be A through F. Considering extension of storage duration, considering triage of some lower risk infectious disease markers such as syphilis, decreasing bag volumes to allow for the manufacture of a greater number of blood components that are made with limited supply of raw materials, triaging donor screening, considering other blood container types in the case of an extreme emergency, or considering alternative plastics that can be used for blood bags for emergency situations. The committee therefore recommends that the ACBTSA convene a working group dedicated to developing a risk gap analysis with associated business costs for the mitigations and contingencies associated with these temporary regulatory measures. The FDA should be engaged in this analysis to assess the risks, and this work should be completed by the end of calendar year 2024. I'll tell you ahead of time that there was many comments on the 6 potential short-term changes. 2 of them in particular came under fire, triaging of lower risk infectious disease markers such as syphilis and triaging donor screening. These and I think in the language of this, the recommendation itself, when I refer back to, or when the group referred back to associated with these temporary regulatory measures, it should have simply been associated with temporary regulatory measures, because this recommendation is all about a working group to put together a list of potential things that could be done in the short term to relieve the strain of a strong surge. But these will be discussed at length. There were comments from the joint group, and there were also comments from the FDA, as I've alluded to. I'm going to ask that you read these now. I personally welcome the comments from the joint comments from AABB, ABC, and the American Red Cross, as well as comments from the FDA, which are not in this slide, because it takes out the particulars that people have taken exception to. It makes it more general, and it leaves it up to a working group to more carefully define short-term measures that can be taken, and that the FDA would be part of this process. But again, this will be open for discussion during whiteboard. But this is the final revised recommendation, the language. It is the language from the joint recommendations. I felt that it covered some of the concerns that the FDA also cited. And finally, the joint comments included this highlighted sentence. Furthermore, our organizations request that ACBTSA clearly delineate the actionable goals and anticipated outcomes of this analysis to facilitate a targeted and productive assessment. And so the recommendation will continue with the actionable goals of this working group would be a list of potential short-term changes to regulations that would be implemented only during emergencies when the necessary surge capacity could not be achieved in a timely manner without the implementation of some or all of these changes. This slide simply contains all of the revised language, including that last clause that we just went through. And finally, recommendation 6. The committee recommends that a memorandum of understanding be negotiated with Canada to allow their blood and blood products into the US and utilization of their testing laboratories to relieve transient strains in the blood supply brought about by emergencies. This would be a bi-directional MOU, and the FDA would participate in this work to assure the safety of the incoming blood from Canada or other countries. And the joint comments from AABB, et cetera, were support of this recommendation. I believe currently we have an MOU with Canada to support their blood supply, but we do not have the converse. Okay, so those are the 6 recommendations. We have until 3:50 to try and work through them. Let's do what we can. I know that everyone's tired. We've put in a lot with the first 4.
Okay, I will share my screen.
Thank you, Kat.
Is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. So there's the original recommendation, and then here's your revised recommendation.
Okay, so I'm just going to read out the revised recommendation because this original recommendation ended up being split over 2 recommendations. The committee recommends that the HHS Office of Infectious Disease and HIV/AIDS Policy, or the OIDP, create a publicly available action plan that 1, includes specific activities to safeguard the availability of blood And 2, indicates how the agency intends to implement coordination and collaboration with other federal entities, including the FDA. So this recommendation is now open for discussion. Is everyone too tired, or is everyone just happy with this as it is? Can we move to, yeah? Did I hear someone comment? Can we move to a vote then?
A second.
All those in favor of passing the revised recommendation as written? Say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Aye.
Recommendation 1 of the second set has been passed. Thank you. Let's keep going. Recommendation 2. Again, I'm just going to turn to the revised version. The committee recommends that HHS should provide companies that produce critical supplies for blood manufacturing storage with specific pathways to speak with funding agencies to develop and enact contingency plans to stabilize the blood supply chain. Any comments on this revised recommendation?
Can I just ask a question? I don't understand how this is different from what companies. I don't understand this recommendation. When there are already specific regulatory pathways that companies can come in to talk about any plans that they have to use to do anything different in manufacturing. I just don't understand this recommendation.
This is, I think, Anne, this is meant to be a contingency plan. This is meant to be a,
Well, I guess my point is, don't wait until the emergency.
no, that's the idea. And so if this language does not address that, then we should wordsmith.
I mean, I think we have a problem now in that we have we need diversity in the supply chain. We only have single suppliers for bags and tubes and other things. Those single suppliers have compliance issues. So I don't think this recommendation gets at any of that. I think it's, like I've said, investment in emergency preparedness is money well spent. So I don't know why you would wait for contingencies plans to come into FDA with, or for a new, manufacturer to come to FDA, for a company to come in and say they have plans to have backup facilities and so forth. Or to manufacture at risk to come into a market. So maybe if you just drop enact contingency plans, the committee recommends that HHS should, and it's not just the companies that are providing critical supplies. The problem is that you need more companies to come into the US market. And for that, there's already pathways that they need to come through. So those are my comments for what they're worth.
Contingency is a preparedness plan where people are prepared, not waiting for the issue to happen.
Claudia, I'm with Ann on this one. I'm failing to understand what this actually means. Are there that they provide manufacturer with specific pathways to speak with funding agencies? What does that mean? Or is there a recommendation to actually groups like NIH and others that fund research or fund development of new technologies that they put out BAAs or requests for proposals? What does it really mean? What are specific pathways to speak with funding agencies? I don't know what it's trying to get at.
I think this got a little lost in translation as attempts to apply the joint comments were made. I think I'm assuming that everyone understands the intent, which is that companies should have plans ahead of time, so that if there is a significant problem with supply chain that affects the blood supply, that contingency plan could be put into effect. And of course, that involves money probably. If people agree with that intent, then let's wordsmith it so that it aligns with the intent. Lou and then Jed.
I think that I've come to understand that me being new to this advisory committee, manufacturers are leaving the spaces because there's not enough money to be made. Their return on investment for establishing manufacturing lines and investing and keeping them compliant is just not there. It doesn't meet their internal hurdle rate. So they're leaving, or they've squeezed every dime, nickel, and penny out of the process, leading to compliance issues. And then on top of that, thank God, I got my fingers crossed, we didn't have a hurricane this year that hit Puerto Rico, but that's just a matter of time again. At the end of the day, this recommendation doesn't seem to work for us. I think we just need to ring the alarm bell around and I made notes really around the industry pay model is not sufficient to attract and keep manufacturers that support the lifeline. Those are my comments.
I think you've gotten to the root cause, Lou. How to address that in a recommendation may be more difficult. Jed, did you take your hand down because you put the comment in the chat?
No, my comment for the chat is actually for a later recommendation.
Okay.
There are not only no incentives, there are over disincentives for preparedness, for having extra supply. Yet we heard at a wonderful session, BARDA-sponsored session in December, that government is very interested in having greater surge capacity than currently exists. Well, you can't have an economic system with disincentives and magically expect that companies are going to create extra robust processes for extra inventory. Therefore, there must be some funding mechanism, and it may be as simple as what you've heard with the tissue, with the skin, which is create a one-time funding mechanism to create an extra month, 2 month, let BARDA determine inventory that's vendor managed, so you're not having outdate. I think that's a very straightforward suggestion.
That's a straightforward suggestion, Jed. I agree, but what about the fact that there's only one supplier essentially for bags or for other, if that supplier goes down?
We have met the enemy and there is us. So the hospitals beat up the blood centers on price, and then the blood centers beat up the vendors on price. And exactly as Lou said, there's economic disincentive to either come into or join the market. I think short-term supply chain issues are separate, and I would keep the recommendation for short-term inventory capacity as separate from how to create incentives for greater competition. That's a longer term and harder fix.
So you think that this recommendation should only be for a short-term stopgap because that's all we can do?
I don't know, short term. for adequate inventories of supply chain to accommodate supply chain disruptions is a separate issue from creating a more robust competitive environment for manufacturers.
I like that. A two-stage approach. Get one base covered today with BARDA, and then set out on a journey of how to address the payer model that would make it more robust for everybody that participates.
Thank you, Lou and Jed. Ray?
I think Lou hit a key part. They're really well described. If that's the goal that we're after, to essentially incentivize new groups or existing groups to enter spaces or to participate in programs for expansion or that address preparedness, the part that's bothered me is, how does this recommendation get you there? By saying you're going to create specific pathways to speak with funding agencies. What you're really saying is you want those funding agencies to create incentives for those groups by, as I was saying, BAAs or RFPs, or some of the things that were described in terms of what BARDA did with tissue. You need them to subsidize, essentially, the work that would be required to change the economic profile of the industry. And I don't know how you do that, but I don't think this language says that or achieves that.
I think all of you are absolutely right, and I think it's a bolder approach than I was taking, and I applaud you for it. What do others think about taking this bigger approach? Simply saying the blood industry is in trouble because there isn't enough money being made, and funding agencies the federal government needs to come and help.
I think it's the right thing to do.
Susan?
Yeah, I think, I agree with everything that's been said. Speaking with agencies about some sort of short-term funding is not going to solve the long-term problem. It won't even solve a stockpile issue. So I think we have to define what it is we're trying to achieve. And I'm thinking about the next recommendation, which is about a task force. And I'm wondering if this issue needs a task force that also includes the suppliers to discuss what is needed.
Thank you. Lou?
For background, could you guys help me? Understanding the payer model as I do today, has it ever been different, or has it ever been explored that it be a separate line item reimbursement for blood or blood products instead of being captured under like DRGs and the like? Have you guys ever explored billing it as a or it being paid for by the insurers, government or otherwise, as a separate line item instead of being rolled up in a global procedure?
The outpatient reimbursement to hospitals is a line item. But all inpatient transfusions, which are the bulk of transfusions, are rolled up within the DRG.
So,
have I captured that correctly? I think so.
it helps me better understand the challenge to shift it all to a line item, and then the industry has to decide, there are antitrust rules that come along with this, but at some point somebody has to pay a price that's going to make the industry sustainable. So I would revise this recommendation along Jed's line that BARDA put in a proposal for buying safety stock at the current manufacturers That's how we address today's surge issue. And then make note that the industry has challenges with the limited number attracting and keeping manufacturers, and we need a global thought on how to keep, acquire, and expand.
So given, I want to take each recommendation in and of itself. And if there's an important recommendation that we end up spending the rest of the time on, so be it, if we don't get to the others. But do people think that Susan is right, that we should create this recommendation, turn this recommendation into a recommendation for a working group to hash this out into a carefully considered recommendation? Or do you think we have the bandwidth to do this now with wordsmithing?
I think it's going to require more effort. I'd table it and proceed with what Susan was suggesting rather than try to resolve it here.
Can we very quickly wordsmith into a, does it need to be, should we simply table it and I can convene a working group that will address this? Because actually, I believe that this is covered in another recommendation as well, where we call for a working group. I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think that there's another recommendation that says we need to start looking at the payer model. Let's move on and come back to this. If nothing else covers this idea of a working group to look at how blood is reimbursed. So recommendation 3, committee recommends that OASH or HHS funding organization receive an enabling budget to be used for projects that stabilize the blood supply, such as stockpile of key supplies and components. This is touching on part of what we're saying, but only part. Committee also recommends that the Assistant Secretary of Health recommend that ASPR elucidate its role in stabilizing the blood supply chain, and the Assistant Secretary of Health revise its policies pertaining to medical countermeasures to ensure the availability of essential items and other critical components necessary for maintaining a secure and adequate blood supply. So this is just a part of that. Anne?
So regarding stockpiling, that's not even possible when the key suppliers can't meet. I mean, I would just, stockpiling is very complicated, very expensive, not even possible if there aren't enough blood bags today. So I would just suggest such as stockpile, just delete the example of a stockpile. That's a pretty, that's, there are only very, I don't know that that's feasible, but for what it's worth, I think the previous, I guess I'm a little disappointed the previous recommendation was tabled, although I don't really see any alternative, because I think that was getting at more what the current problem is and what is needs to be addressed first. Yeah.
So Anne, can I recap? We have a bigger problem. The biggest problem is industry is not entering the marketplace because there isn't reimbursement. Without industry, without competition, without multiple partners, how do we even put together a stockpile? Because we don't necessarily even have enough to keep things going. Does that sort of capture it?
Yeah, that captures it for sure. Just my view. But and again, I wasn't involved in earlier discussions of the committee, but maybe if there was a better or different example or some other ideas other than stockpiling, they could be included here.
Anne, can I ask a question? Is the concern about stockpiling that concept that it gets stored away in some shed somewhere for some federal agency to manage? Or is the concern that in general, we shouldn't encourage blood centers to grow their supply? I get, right, that there's no extra kits out there right now, but part of the supply issue really happened, and Jed has said this a few different ways, when the blood centers started to feel pressure due to funding to not keep a supply and take their supplies really low. So is there a method where we could encourage something with the blood centers to build their supplies back to what used to happen years ago?
So what you describe, so what I think of a stockpile is your first example, not necessarily
Okay.
government is managing it, but just that it requires excess. It requires management. It requires, it's very expensive because you're going to outdate a lot of stuff, but you accept that. What you're describing in your second example, I don't consider stockpiling. I consider that inventory management of your critical supplies. So if that's the recommendation, then and if blood centers have just gotten too efficient at first in, first out and just in time supplies, I mean, that failed
Failed miserably during the pandemic. Yep.
That's what you're talking about, then that's,
Yeah.
I mean, that might be stockpiling. That's not what I think of as stockpiling.
I mean, I think from what I'm hearing from other blood centers, and I think it's both access to revenue or resource issue, meaning do I have enough money to put 90 days of blood bags on my shelf, and an access to space. So I don't know if that's a problem that we could solve in some way, Claudia, by some rewording of something that at least gives us a longer runway.
I think the problem, I know that in discussions with BCA, for instance, that there are stockpiling models that have already gone into effect. And I've also discussed this with Red Cross. I do think that the heart of the problem is we're worried about having enough of everything because there isn't, or there potentially isn't, or we're getting close to a place where potentially isn't, and we want to avert that disaster. And I don't want to table that second recommendation. It's that I want to come back to it after overview of the recommendations to see if we're addressing any of the reimbursement issue. But I while we were talking, I looked through and we're not. So I don't know that we need a recommendation to develop a working group. We're allowed to develop, ACBTSA is allowed to develop a working group at any time. To begin.
I don't think it's going to be resolved here. I'm personally, I mean, take this, with a grain of salt. I don't think if you start talking about the previous recommendation, I don't think you'll get very far into these other ones.
Right.
So I mean, I defer to you as the chair as to how to do this, but maybe have additional discussion, because I thought it was really important. I mean, that was getting at how to incentivize a more diversified supply chain. I think. So, yeah.
I am determined to develop a working group, and all those who are interested, please email me in being part of it. You will certainly be called upon. Because it is at the heart of the issue. It is the root cause of, I think, a lot of our problems that we're trying to get at from many different angles here. So I don't consider this recommendation tabled. I consider that we will take it up with the 59th. Paul?
Yeah, I think you would have great courage to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great courage to develop a real comprehensive look at reimbursement, but for those people new to the committee and the efforts, the history is such that this has been attacked in many different ways over time. Many years ago, AABB, when actually I was president, tried to deal with this. And at that point, the blood centers basically told AABB this wasn't a blood center problem, this was a hospital problem, and they really wanted nothing to do with it. We sort of laughed at that point and or cried, I guess we should say, at that point. But the other issue was we would go to groups like the American Hospital Associations and such, and they would say, well, this is all a zero-sum game. So if the government allows us to charge more for blood in the hospital, it's going to take away other things that we can charge for in other hospital activities. So basically, the aggregate is that everybody undervalues what we do and isn't really willing to pay for it. And as a result, hospitals don't want to pay more, and blood centers can't charge more, and companies stay out of it. Previous, we put together a report to the Congress, and we were sort of encouraged not to talk about reimbursement. Like it's a dead elephant right in the middle of the room, but it's really the cause and the major problem leading to all of this kind of stuff is the inadequate reimbursement that we get for what we do. So if Claudia is brave enough to try to put together a working group to really deal with this, I think it'd be great. But I guess I'm not optimistic that we're going to get too far, because we haven't ever been able to get too far in the past without, somebody at a higher level really saying, hey, you guys are right. We really need to fix this problem.
I think,
Yeah, please, Ray.
I was just going to say, I think Paul's also hitting the nail on the head like Lou did, in the sense that there is a fundamental issue here at play, but it's a very difficult one to resolve. So the sense of tabling this is, I think you could put forward a recommendation like this, which really doesn't get to the crux of the problem. Or you could go after that much more difficult situation of saying, how do you incentivize people to take part in an industry that is not profitable or barely profitable? It's almost like saying you want subsidies for the auto industry because the consequence is that the auto industry is going to fail. And you've got everything and all the dynamics associated with free market enterprise in this country that go in, and the politicization of these kinds of issues that lead to the kind of roadblocks that Paul was describing. So I think what I would say is, if you're going to tackle it at the fundamental problem. Don't flail at the leaves of the problem, go to the roots if you want to solve it. But it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of thinking about how to do that and strategizing about how to do that. I think otherwise you put forward, a recommendation here that is flailing at the leaves. It's not solving the problem. It's not addressing the fundamental issue.
I think we're going to put together a working group, and I think we're going to talk about some verboten issues like antitrust, like turning blood into a utility rather than a widget. So we will do that, and I hope that we've done enough work so that the 59th will address this. It's going to be big. It's going to take a lot of work. But I really appreciate the committee for speaking so forthrightly about this. If we move to the fourth recommendation, Kat, we are moving beyond things that will just sort of shore up the industry. This is I think an important recommendation in terms of just, we have a perishable material. If we can extend its shelf life, it will stabilize the industry somewhat. So what do people think about addressing this recommendation?
This is Anne again, sorry. So it's pretty much the same comment. I mean, FDA is the agency that's responsible for the safety and effectiveness of the materials that are used to test and collect blood. And during the review process, stability and shelf life are a review issue. So okay, let me just say that whatever recommendation the recommendation should not raise issues that might compromise safety and effectiveness. If there are supplies that can have longer shelf lives, companies should come to FDA now and get those longer shelf lives. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what this recommendation would really accomplish, because you don't want to. Sorry.
So I think of this recommendation as spurring the development of research that would lead to petitioning the FDA for approval.
I did not get that from this recommendation, but certainly, research. Okay, that's not how I read this recommendation, but if it is to encourage research to allow longer storage times that would then come to FDA, that's not how I read this. So thank you for clarification.
Well, no, I mean, it shouldn't require clarification, but this first sentence, offer grant or contract funding that enables the development of novel means for extending the outdate of perishable materials in the stockpile. Does that need clarification?
Well, novel means, so, okay, I'm sorry, maybe I just don't get it, but I don't understand this recommendation. So is it research to, are you advocating for research, or are you advocating for a different regulatory pathway?
No, I'm advocating for research. The working group advocated for research.
Okay, then why do you need number 2? Because you don't need the agencies already exist within HHS that would review that research. So am I just fundamentally not getting this?
No. And I honestly don't remember. I don't remember whether any of those came from joint comments or whether this
Claudia, when we originally had the conversation around this, I think there were some presentations from some manufacturing groups about extending the shelf life based on current product. And there was talk that the current product could actually potentially last longer on the shelf than what it was labeled for, but that doing the work that was required to extend it was cost prohibitive, even though it was likely that it was going to work. I think I agree with Ann on this one, that I don't think that the goal here is, and made the comment at the time, to reduce the standard or to change sort of the goal line of what needs to be done. And there are mechanisms by which groups can go forward to make proposals for extending shelf life on existing products, or to come up with new products that may have longer shelf life. There are mechanisms available to do that. I think the added language about offering grant or contract funding that enables the development of novel means, all of that makes sense. And it sort of improves what the outcome was. But I would agree that I don't think you need number 2 here. The pathways for being able to get those kinds of approvals already exist, right? Don't they? And I think it just makes it clear that you'll fund the development, you'll fund, they'll find ways to fund the development, fund the work, but ultimately you got to take it to the agencies that are responsible for assuring the health and safety of these products.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Anne. Lou?
Yeah, building on those comments, it kind of translates for me that we're asking the government to provide money to the current manufacturers for validation studies that would extend the packaging shelf life.
This could be funds for either development of novel products or for, as you know, Ray has helped jog my memory, for the validation of changes to the regulations for current products.
I think that given my experience on the tissue and medical device side, as a manufacturer, the FDA struggles with trying to thread a needle novelly through their system. So asking for that would probably cause more heartburn and delays than using the existing pathways. And I think that what we heard from the folks in Puerto Rico, they would need money above and beyond what they're currently budgeted for the product line to add people and or resources to complete the validation studies. So to address our near-term desires of having safety stock or an extended shelf life, I think the recommendation might best serve us to just ask for the money for the validation studies with the current manufacturers and see if that gets any traction. Because there's no guarantee that even if you had a grant program and you said to the manufacturer, I'm willing to pay for all the validation work, that they don't have other internal competing projects with a better ROI that would still, cause them to go first and our efforts to go second, third, fourth, or whatever.
Could you achieve that by saying offer contract or grant or contract funding that enables validation of existing products or the development of novel means for extending the outdate of perishable materials in the stockpile?
Lou?
Still struggling with the use of novel and developing novel as opposed to using existing validation processes for evaluating current technology. Because I don't know if I see an end to novel, but I do see an end to testing current packaging with current validation protocols to determine where the actual expiration date belongs.
So you would take a development of novel means and just say validation of existing products for extending the outdate of perishable materials in the stockpile.
Lou?
Yes, my silence was agreement with Ray's. Sorry about that.
Stacy and then Susan.
So I'm confused if we should keep the word stockpile in this one, because in previous recommendations, we didn't like that because we weren't really going that direction.
So simply outdated perishable materials.
I think so.
And we are referring to materials used to manufacture blood or blood components, right?
That's a great addition.
We could insert that in, shouldn't we?
We're not talking about milk.
Susan?
Yeah, I was also going to comment on the stockpile, which hadn't really been defined, so I agreed to remove that. I thought that when we discussed this in our last meeting, the root cause of the shortage was not that blood bags were expiring unused. They just weren't being manufactured fast enough. So while I think it would be, I have no objection to having money available to see if you can extend a shelf life of perishable, it's not clear to me that this is the root cause of the problem that we're facing now.
Would this reduce wastage?
I don't know, is there
wastage?
wastage? I don't know.
I
Yes,
wonder
ma'am.
if this issue of extending the perishables, I wasn't obviously on your committee before, but last year when one of the large blood bag manufacturers had to move from manufacturing in Puerto Rico to manufacturing in another country, there was a very short time frame of expiration, but that was really the manufacturer not doing their work with the FDA. And the FDA did work with them in a really productive way from my point of view. I don't know. I guess we should ask our FDA friends, but to get that extended. So I don't know if that's why this became a topic.
I think it actually originated in the stockpile idea. Could we keep things in a stockpile longer because so much of the cost of stockpile is rotation? If that is gone from this idea, does this idea still have legs? If we're not averting wastage by extending shelf life, I don't know. Lou?
I think we head back to what a previous statement Jevin said before, is that we asked BARDA to truly test the manufacturer's processing capabilities. And after our July meeting, I had a phone call with Bill from BCA and the folks at Fresenius Cava concerning their manufacturing. And what I learned is that the hurricanes the prior couple of years had really set them back in Puerto Rico, which led to the emergency authorization of the use of the bag from the plant in Europe. And that emergency authorization could be extended on request if needed. Then I circled back to them on, okay, so how are things going in Puerto Rico and what they're making up? They're making progress. And they were adding to their own safety stock in Puerto Rico. And I called Bill, I go, Bill, how are your inventory levels, at least for, that half of the industry, if you will? He's like, we're making progress, but it sounded like if there was a purchase order that was put in by somebody for extra stock to be managed at Puerto Rico or wherever their distribution facility is, Fresenius Cava may increase or could increase their manufacturing output to meet those levels. Then the question was, okay, the expiry date on all the goods manufactured, when does that become an issue? And that's where they thought that there would have to be additional validation studies, rightly so, on the different reagents and the bag materials and so on. So I am left with the impression that if a big order was placed with Fresenius Cava at the Puerto Rico plant, they could work excess over time, taking bites of that big apple to build a safety stock. And I think that could be, we could go back to that recommendation of asking BARDA to do that type of program like SKIN, and then ask the agency, BARDA, again, for funds for validation studies, which would extend the shelf life, making it a lot easier for everybody to manage the vendor manage the inventory across the spectrum.
Lou, I'm not sure that FK does have the ability to just increase at least all of their bags, because I think a lot of the manufacturing right now in Puerto Rico is for their double red cell kits and kind of the specialty kits on automation. And I think most of the industry is on a fairly tight allocation of those bags until at least March or April of this year. I think maybe once they get those problems fixed, I'm guessing what you're saying is accurate, that maybe then they have some production ability, but right now we're still seeing some challenges.
And Stacy, I will say that I attempted to get an update from them heading into this meeting, and I did not hear back from my contact. So I'm working with dated information, and they didn't respond to my email asking for an update on how much progress they've made in the absence of a very light hurricane season in the Caribbean.
Well, Lou, I can maybe help get you connected with someone if you aren't successful.
I will, Stacy, I'll tap into you if they don't ultimately respond. Thank you.
Okay.
So back to the recommendation. With the current wordsmithing, is this helpful? So we certainly don't want to just clog Botsak's role with recommendations that are not useful.
So as a blood center representative, I guess I'd like to hear from some of the rest of the people. I'm not sure that extending the out date is really accomplishing our issue, but I could be wrong. I feel like I'm behind because you've had so many conversations.
This is a moving target, Stacy.
Okay.
And again, I think the earlier discussion on the real root causes of some of these problems is underpins everything, that so many of these recommendations. Anyone else then? Lynn?
So I'm actually, I think this is not an unreasonable recommendation to put forward as it stands, following the wordsmithing. And keying off what Lou had said with regard to manufacturers making decisions about how they're going to focus their energies, I was thinking to myself that perhaps the support for doing the validation studies of existing, I'm just going to call them widgets, necessary to go into the blood supply may be helpful, because then they can use their internal funding, if you will, for the novel part of exploration. So it, at the end of the day, just may support them and at the same time meet our needs. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I need to get a sense. Are there two camps here? You know, this is useful, this is not useful, or do people in general support this as currently written?
Claudia, don't take me as a camp. Take me as the newbie. So I would go with Lynn.
No, Stacy, you're a voice of sanity. I don't take you at all as a, you're not a newbie.
I would support it as it's been reworked. I think maybe it doesn't solve all the problem, but it could be beneficial if a stockpile ever comes to fruition. You're right, Claudia. I think this started with the idea of extending shelf life of product if it goes into a stockpile. That may or may not come to fruition. If it did, would it not make sense to have products that you could store longer in that stockpile? It may solve a more, as Lou said, it may solve a more immediate need. There's a longer term need that may need to be addressed separately. Ultimately, I agree with what you said. All of these are kind of subsets of the bigger issue that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I would agree it chisels away at some of what the short-term needs are in case we have that. But I think we should keep our eye on the big target as we're gonna have a working group and stuff. But I think if we put nothing forward, it's not gonna chisel away at things. And I think the way this is reworded is good to go forward from my perspective.
I move to move it forward.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
Second.
Okay, Kat, should we remove the intention part? Thank you. Okay, all those in favor of the revised recommendation 4 as written? All those opposed? Thank you, everyone. Let's move on to number 5. Now I've already spoken at length about the original recommendation as written and the many strong opinions I've heard against it as written. So I'd like to simply skip to the revised recommendation for our discussion. The committee recommends that HHS, including the FDA, work to convene a multi-organizational working group, including government agencies and national experts from leading blood associations and organizations, to identify potential opportunities to pre-establish additional regulatory flexibility that could be granted in case of short or long-term surge capacity needs to extend the U.S. blood supply without impacting the safety, purity, or potency of blood donation. This analysis shall include an assessment of risks and burden associated with the different temporary options. The actionable goals of this working group would be a list of suggested short-term changes to regulations that would be implemented only during emergencies when the necessary surge capacity could not be achieved in a timely manner without the implementation of some or all of these changes. This is open for discussion. Jed.
Yeah, John Hick, during our supply chain presentation at ABB, showed efforts that Minnesota Department of Health did that I had the honor of participating in. And they were actions both at the hospital level and blood collection agency level, some of which, actually a minority of which were regulatory, but that might be a good template to jump off from. And I gave the link.
Thank you, Jed. So that would be something that the working group would consider. A good place to start. Thank you. Susan.
I would suggest you consider adding suppliers to this also, since you're talking about extending shelf lives. It just gives you additional things you can consider.
So you mean by suppliers, you mean industry partners? Or
yeah, supplier. I don't remember what the term was, but you know, suppliers of the bags, reagents, etc.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Susan. Anne? Maybe unmute Anne.
Sorry. I thought somebody else had their hand up. Sorry. Does it? No. Okay. Paul, go ahead, and then I'll.
Yeah, I was looking at this, and I understand what we're trying to do, but in some ways, what we've said doesn't make sense. So, in the first paragraph, you said, "What can we do without impacting the safety, purity, or potency of blood?" Okay, and then so then the logical question to me is, why don't we do it all the time? So I think maybe what you're saying is with minimal changes to those things, but if they don't affect these other things, then there's no good reason not to do it all the time.
Yeah, I have similar comment. I mean, I think as revised, and I certainly, Claudia, I sent you comments in advance. I certainly did not mean them as an attack.
No, not taken as such. Yeah.
They were simply to point out that, and I'll just share with this group that, I mean, at the beginning of COVID, FDA was bombarded with everybody's ideas of what regulations we should eliminate. And they ranged from anything. I mean, as you might imagine, everybody's least favorite regulation was, that person's target to eliminate. So I'm generally supportive. I think there is a problem, as Paul pointed out, that a lot of our focus has been to eliminate unnecessary, for example, donor deferrals, and eliminating the VCJD deferrals that didn't contribute to safety. There's already a mechanism where blood centers can ask for alternative procedures, provided they can support with data. So somewhere in here, there has to be that such anything that's recommended, number one, has to be supported by data. Paul's comment that if it truly does not affect the safety, purity, or potency of blood donation, then the question is, why is it a regulation at all? So at this point, there aren't many, my final comment, I'm sorry, I'll get off my soapbox, but my final comment was, during COVID, very quickly, we had to decide what regulatory flexibilities would be reasonable. And they were ones that FDA did intend to keep past the public health emergency. So I just don't know that this recommendation is needed. And instead, maybe the field can just continue to engage in discussions about regulations that if it can be supported with data that they truly do not contribute to safety, purity, or potency, then they should be changed. Those are my comments.
I know that there have been people over the years saying syphilis, for instance, is not a necessary test, and that there are data accumulated to back that. So it isn't necessarily.
So we don't have to get into the weeds. Syphilis is a particularly bad example when its incidence and prevalence is increasing, in particular among those infected with HIV. So all I'm saying is, FDA, we are interested in having these conversations. And I don't know that you need to make it a recommendation. If this recommendation were, a lot of people talk about walking blood banks and so forth and so on. Well, there's a lot of thought that has to go into a walking blood bank, and how you would do that safely and effectively when there are no other options. I mean, something that sort of like, I guess what I'm saying is, we're already open to having these discussions. So maybe you don't need this recommendation, or maybe you can tweak it to talk about things that really do require some additional thought and risk analysis. And how would you do, not in a military setting or in Rwanda or wherever it is that they're doing this walking blood bank, what circumstances under, catastrophic disasters, might you consider not regulatory flexibilities, but just, what you need to do to provide blood when none is available. Those are my comments.
I think for me, Anne, if I sort of just flip what you've said, that is the approach that was being taken with this recommendation. We are in a catastrophic situation, and it is either drop some regulations so that blood can be made available rapidly. It may not be as safe. And this recommendation has been watered down because
I defer to you. I mean, I don't have any objection. I've already said we're open to these discussions, and if you want to make it a formal recommendation, I certainly do not object. I'm just saying, I just want to go on record as saying we're open to having those discussions without a recommendation, that's all.
No, thank you. But I agree with Paul. The original recommendation included some statements that were not met, were not well met. And if you'd scroll up a bit, Kat, to some of those whereas statements in the original, yeah, things in red. Yes, it would reduce the safety, absolutely. And so we're considering a recommendation for a catastrophic event where the need for blood is paramount, and certainly lives will be lost if we do not take shortcuts. And I don't want to make a recommendation like that lightly, because of course the safety of the blood supply is the first thing that, you know, all of us as blood bankers consider. Cassandra.
So, you know, I think that we do this for patients. I mean, you know, we bend the rules for granulocytes. We bend the rules for people when we're trying to save their lives. And if we're thinking about it as a community as opposed to certain patients, you know, we give least incompatible blood to people that we think are going to bleed, and, you know, or they're going to die if we don't give them some hemoglobin. I mean, I'm just thinking about medicine, and it's, you know, this is extremists we're talking about. So when Anne said, you know, exceptions to the regulatory rules, we're talking about those exceptions in exceptional circumstances, and that's the only part of it. Now, I recognize there's a slippery slope there, but we do this, and we do it every day. So the question is, could we do it in a more population-based way because we're in a bad situation? So I think it is an important thing that we have a recommendation and have it open to talk with the FDA, and have it. I think it's an important aspect of our understanding where those rules are being bent and why they're being bent for this reason, and we can put them back in place when we have the capability to do that.
Okay, I appreciate those comments. And I just want to say very quickly, Jed, I really appreciate this document. It's quite amazing and quite impressive. And a lot of them have nothing to do with regulations and just reflect to take a broader view on what you might need to do in under scarce resource situations. That's all.
Ray.
Oh, I was just going to say I took a peek at what Jed sent around, and I agree it's an excellent way of approaching the problem. It would be an excellent starting point for a discussion. I think the controversy that you hear now, Claudia, around all of these points in red that are on the screen, those are the kinds of topics that probably would be discussed within this working group. It is a risk benefit based on situational dynamics that are occurring at a particular moment. Just as Cassandra was pointing out. So I think you'd have to be careful if the recommendation is to convene a working group to have this discussion, maybe using that material that Jed provided as a starting point. That's a good thing, but I think you do have to be careful about, and Paul points out an obvious contradiction in the logic, you know, if these are things that you're only going to do it if it doesn't impact any of these other things, and why aren't we doing it on a regular basis? Why aren't we eliminating those? So I think you have to be careful going there, maybe changing the language to some degree in here, but focusing on putting a group together to have a discussion about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what other kinds of options, some of which are outlined in that presentation Jed sent around, would be possible to consider, maybe not things you would implement in routine, but that you would consider doing in special circumstances.
Now, this is not supposed to be about routine. This is, and Paul really did nail it. This is supposed to be catastrophic and plan for catastrophe. Well, can we wordsmith the recommendation then? Thank you, Kat, to reflect that the working group would be balancing the risks and benefits and suggesting enactment only when the worst has happened. And retracting it immediately upon stabilization.
This is Glenn Ramsey. I have maybe one more thought about this, if it's okay. The FDA sometimes puts out documents that are asking for input on certain areas in terms of how to solve a problem. And I don't have a good example in front of me, but one, it might, perhaps there could be some encouragement from the FDA to think about what issues they would be interested in hearing about. That might stimulate some discussion among the interested parties about how to respond to that. Maybe it's a question for Ann, I guess, in terms of how that sort of thing would work.
Thank you. Sure. Go
Okay,
on.
thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to have further discussions. It is what we do and try to do. So, and maybe should do more of. So thank you for that comment.
So do people have suggestions for wordsmithing this revised recommendation to capture some of these discussions? Capture these discussions.
I think you have to take out the part about without impacting the safety, purity, or potency of the blood donation. I think you have to say, granted in case of short or long-term surge capacity needs to extend the U.S. blood supply, and leave it to the committee to determine what's acceptable and what's not acceptable under the circumstances, maybe playing it out in different scenarios.
Or maybe that's where you put the line balancing risks and benefits.
Yeah. Maybe you say while balancing risks and benefits or something to that effect.
Yeah, that's kind of in the next sentence to some extent, if you wanted to adjust that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. It does cover it already. What do people think of it as is?
And, or Claudia, I just have one very minor comment. But do we really need the work to convene? Can't we just say convene? Was there a reason?
No.
Trim it? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
I stuck suppliers in here in this spot. I'm not sure if it's the best spot for it. Maybe it belongs a little farther down in the sentence. Just checking.
I have no thoughts about that.
Okay, if it's
Do
okay.
other people feel strongly that it should be further down? I think as long as it's comprehensive, it's not necessarily a rank order.
Okay, sure.
Are people ready to move to vote then?
I would move to.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor of passing this revised recommendation as written? All those opposed? Are Suchi, are you opposed or is that a errant hand?
Sorry, errant hand.
Then this recommendation passes. Let's move on to the last one. I hope that this is easy. The committee recommends that a memorandum of understanding be negotiated with Canada to allow their blood and blood products into the US and utilization of their testing laboratories to relieve transient strains in the blood supply brought about by emergencies. This would be bidirectional, and the FDA would participate in the work to assure the safety of the incoming blood from Canada or other countries. Sridhar.
This is an interesting issue because, I mean, maybe the testing laboratory thing I could see, but Canada has maybe 1/10 of the population of the United States. So how do we expect that if there's a shortage of blood in the United States, that Canada will somehow be able to supply the US? It just doesn't seem, I think this whole importing medical supplies from Canada seems to be a big deal right now because maybe people can import drugs and stuff from Canada now. And that, but that's something that's made in a factory. I mean, this is blood obviously comes from a person. I just don't see how this would be practical per se.
Fair point. Susan? I think you're on mute, Susan.
Not again. They are a different country and they use different products. For their testing, they use CE mark products. So if their labs were to test the US blood supply, it would be different. It could be different tests than are currently approved in the US. Blood bags also, they may use different blood bags. So it's not so simple, I think. Their products are different. They're different from US products.
And you think that the testing would also be limited?
Well, the tests they use are typically CE mark tests. They may or may not also be FDA approved. They don't currently test for Babesia, so we need to figure out how to get Babesia tests. It's just, it's not like everything they do is exactly the same as what US blood banks do. That's all I'm trying to say.
And yet they would accept from us. We already have an MOU in place for that. Stacy?
So I wonder if this isn't where, and I don't know if we have to tie it together, but if you think about the working group that was going to get together to kind of evaluate what should be done, the differences between Canada and US, if there was a major situation with the differences in blood bag, the differences in testing, that's one that probably with some guidance from and participation with the FDA, we might be able to figure a path forward, even though everything wasn't exactly the same. So that working group would probably have to tie into the MOU. If this is, the purpose of this is for those rare circumstances where we're trying to build surge. I think we're assuming that it's only impacting the US and not Canada, that maybe that's a viable solution to build time for the blood centers to stand up their collection efforts.
Thank you. Anne?
Sorry, I got called away for a minute there, so I didn't hear. I think Sridhar was commenting, and so maybe this will be redundant. I also heard Susan's comment, and this is not at all simple. This is not at all a straightforward recommendation, but it is something that, for example, and it may not, I think, sorry, this was just said, but if it's a global catastrophe, this isn't even feasible, right? Because Canada would be in the same situation as we are. So having said that, there are considerations, for example, in the military where no other blood is available and they have to consider what is available where they are. So I have nothing against Canada. I would take a transfusion of their blood in a heartbeat, but this recommendation is worded is I don't think is at all practicable. And it just detracts from the other recommendations, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Glenn?
Oh, sorry, I muted unmuting my mute. So I was just thinking of the potential of some kind of mass casualty event near the Canadian border, where, Buffalo, Detroit, Northwest, where it might be, there might be some consideration of this, where Canadian donors might want to donate to help out, et cetera, or the same going back the other way. So that's just another dimension to throw in. Thanks.
Well, is this useful? Or are the complications associated with it so great that we shouldn't wade in?
I had a question for Anne. How did we formally, a long time ago, allow blood coming in from Germany? That was a significant amount of blood coming into New York.
I, with all due respect, Paul, I don't know how to say that, but that was before my time.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But foreign blood.
And I believe that wasn't that under FDA license?
Foreign blood, it's either if it's collected. So there is export for import, but anything that's imported from another country has to be collected in the US under all of the regulations. So maybe that was the situation. I don't know. So if there is a foreign establishment that sends blood to the US, that blood was collected in the US, and that facility meets all FDA.
This was a long time ago, and there was significant amount of blood, I think mostly coming into New York from Germany.
Okay.
But I think, this is Glenn, I think that was under FDA license over there.
Mm-hmm. In which case it was collected, in which case the source material met all FDA.
Okay, all right. Not suggesting we want to do that, but I'm just wondering. Yeah.
And yeah, that's all.
Ray and then Cassandra.
I don't think it was limited to Germany. I remember being observing a blood drive in the Netherlands, and they were putting little American stickers, US flag stickers, on certain blood bags. And I asked, well, what are those? And they were intended to be sent to New York, as Paul was describing. So something was in place in the past that was allowing that. I guess the question I have related to this is, who's asking for this?
No one. This came up, we had a working group assembled to develop recommendations for the ACBTSA, and this came onto the table from someone in the working group, and it was enthusiastically embraced as a, quote unquote, simple, Canadian blood is safe, as Anne has said, and we are good neighbors, and we have an MOU in place where we send them blood when needed, if needed. So why not make it bidirectional? That was the spirit of it. And of course, once again, the devil's in the details. If the details are too much, then Cassandra?
So I totally respect what Ann said, and devil's definitely in the details, but I heard what Glenn said, and I am a little confused about the way tissue is sort of managed in do we, because I wanted to kind of liken it a little bit to that. Do we import tissue from other places around the world into the United States and then implant it into American citizens? Does that happen? I don't know, Diane and everybody is tissue.
I would say, our tissue bank doesn't, but I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. We just haven't had the need to or anything. I believe that there is a tissue bank in Florida that does import. Lou, are you still on?
Cassandra, NMDP does as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, thank you. That's a good point, Lynn.
I would caution against comparing blood safety. You know, tissues is a different risk, you know, it's a different risk model. It's a different,
I know. I just was thinking of precedent. So the reason I'm saying all that is because, again, these are extreme circumstances. We're not trying to make it like a rule to do. But I just, you know, and I think the cellular therapy is a little closer to blood but I know it fits under the tissue standards. And I mean, I'm not trying to change anything, but I am trying to advocate for the idea that in extremis, again, we are right on the connecting border of a place that we think is pretty safe. And we know that there are terrorists and terrorist acts and things that are happening in those places. And I just don't want to maybe say that we shouldn't even like think about this, because it may very well be that we have to do this for some reason, unfortunately. And we have so much of our border at the northern part of the United States that sits there. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I don't know that we should just.
Well, I guess I'll just say this would not be allowed under any circumstances under the current regulations. So if this is, you know, if this is or has even ever been invoked as a, we've never needed to do this. And
Right.
Canada, just to point out that Canada, most of Europe, I mean, the United States provides 80% of the source plasma that's manufactured into plasma derivatives. So they're used to accepting source material that's collected in the US. So, like I said, I just think this recommendation is complicated. You know, we might do something in extremis that you wouldn't need this recommendation.
Okay, but if that's the case, then I'm just trying to not, maybe a memorandum of understanding is the wrong way to approach it, but to not negate potentially needing blood there. So that's all I wanted to bring up.
Roll this into I think somebody already said this. I'm sorry, I'm getting called away, but I think you could roll this into your working group about what would you do in extremis? What are the issues? You know, blood is tested differently. It's collected differently. The tests are different. The risk, frankly, they have a much lower incidence and prevalence of HIV in Canada. So you would just have to consider all of these things. I think this can be rolled into your working group on under what circumstances, what should
Acceptable.
be considered. We would, framing this as an MOU, probably isn't the way to get this concept included in what it is I'm hearing in the discussion.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. It sounds that was a reasonable suggestion from Anne, unless I hear otherwise that people think this should be moved forward. This could be rolled into, we have two working groups that are coming from this meeting. One is the big one, how to address reimbursement issues to make the blood industry functional, or function well. And the second would be what measures can be taken during the most extreme circumstances so that blood is still available and may be less safe, but is still available. So with those in mind, shall we shelve this, or do people want to move to a vote? It takes silence to be.
I would suggest.
I think we need to put it into the working group thing. I don't think we should do that. I mean,
Fair
that's
enough
just
then.
based on what we
I
heard, what I
agree.
heard.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of
Yeah.
nodding and agreement, so yes. Unless somebody.
Yeah, Claudia, I just want to say, there's been a lot of chatter in the chat, and with really important, relevant information. So I'm asking that, will that information be captured so that as this particular item, as it sounds like to me, will be rolled into the working group, that the discussion is captured so that folks don't have to reinvent the wheel here.
Oh,
So,
yeah, it's good. It's great. Thank you, everybody, for weighing in.
Kat or Megan, will the chat be captured in the minutes?
We can make sure that it is, yes.
thank you.
Are you
Um,
all set with recommendations, or did you need to go back to anything?
no, I think we are done.
Okay, great.
We're done 3 minutes early. The next is overview of future ACBTSA work. And so we've heard some of that overview already, that there will be 2 working groups that will be assembled. One to address reimbursement or how to make the blood industry work well. It's a big ask, and that working group will need to be diverse. It will need to have health economists, we'll need to have industry people, blood center people, and I'll be calling upon all of you to help out, because I'm so impressed with the brain trust we have in this group. The many ideas and different points of view that help develop the recommendations into something that works. But there are other things beyond those 2 working groups, the one on reimbursement and the one on extreme measures. There are other things that are under development. The ACBTSA had recommended an alloantibody exchange, and that work has been ongoing. We're in the 2nd year now of discussions for how to implement an alloantibody exchange nationally. And I'm encouraged by the work, and I'm very excited to see sort of a dovetailing between discussions of the alloantibody exchange as well as movement forward with universal ways to express data, so that we will all it'll be apples to apples when we eventually develop an alloantibody exchange. We'll be able to look at genetic genotypes and phenotypes and express them in a way that is universal, so that blood centers and hospitals will be able to talk to one another easily. There is a tissue. There's a working group that's addressing tissue traceability that I'd like to ask Diane to talk about, because anyone who has been following the news knows that there's been another outbreak of TB as a result of tissue, and being able to trace the tissues rapidly is so important. So Diane, could you tell us about how that working group is going?
Sure. Over the last 2 years, there's been 2 cases of TB transmission. Both resulted in some deaths in patients. So this has been an extremely hot topic through AETB, CDC, ACBTSA, everything. The first was in 2021 and the second in 2023. And some of that just came out into the news. AETB very strongly, has been involved and has made some changes in donor selection criteria. These have been from live cells in cellular grafts, not irradiated or fully processed grafts. So they've made some changes in criteria. And because of all of this, ACBTSA formed a working group that's looking into the tissue tracking and traceability of individual grafts and donors, just to make sure that we ensure that we have the best tracking and tracing, especially because a lot of the tissue go into surgical centers, go into hospitals, and go abroad. So it's very important. So this has been a working group that is ongoing.
And so those are the major projects that we're going to be seeing in future ACBTSA meetings. If anyone has other projects in mind that the ACBTSA should take on, you know how to get in touch with us, I think. This meeting has been highly successful from my point of view. There were some recommendations that were not mature, and we took care of those, either by wordsmithing or by shelving them, and I think that's appropriate. I want to thank everyone on the committee for the tremendous job that they've done. I just continue to be so impressed with everyone's willingness to take the time and use their expertise to better the blood industry. I also especially want to thank everyone on Jim Berger at HHS, Jim Berger and his staff, for the incredible number of hours they've put into making this meeting work, taking recommendations and turning them into something that's feasible, and posting them in the public record. Taking the comments from the public and incorporating those. I also want to thank the support staff, Megan, Kat, and others who have been in the background, Mike, running the slides, doing the whiteboard, making sure that things run smoothly. That also has been a tremendous amount of work, and the amount of planning that's gone into it would have made a memorandum of understanding with Canada seem simple. So, so thank you to everyone. Does anyone have any other comments?
Thank you, Claudia, for all of the hard work you did putting everything together.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
thank you. And thank you to all. And Diane, I couldn't have done it without you, without Jim, without the staff. So I look forward to the 59th meeting of the ACBTSA and to seeing many of you before then.
Very good.
Thank you.
So with
Take
that,
care,
Claudia,
everyone.
this
Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye,
Yep.
everyone.
Claudia,
Any
this
closing
concludes
comments?
the 58th meeting, closing it out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.